The Buckingham Palace dinner had been designed to project unity, confidence, and royal control. Yet before the final course arrived, one whispered sentence cut through the room with greater force than any public accusation. A senior courtier leaned toward Prince William and revealed that Meghan had privately demanded a formal return to palace life, and that King Charles had rejected her request only minutes before the guests took their seats. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William remained perfectly still as the gathering continued around him. Charles, Camilla, Catherine, senior relatives, trusted courtiers, and carefully selected public guests had been placed according to a plan meant to display stability. A courtier was a senior palace figure who advised or served members of the royal household. Every entrance, seat, and conversation had been controlled because the king wanted the evening focused on service, not the Sussexes. Meghan and Harry were absent, yet their names carried enough weight to change the room. The courtier lowered his voice and explained that Meghan had asked Charles to approve her formal return to Buckingham Palace, restore private access to royal residences, reserve a prominent place at the next family dinner, and publicly acknowledge her renewed royal role. William's hand remained beside his untouched glass. Catherine noticed the tension immediately and asked what had happened. The prince answered only that the request was bigger than they had been told. Charles saw the exchange from across the table and understood that his private refusal had leaked. The king's expression hardened because Meghan's demand was no longer the only crisis. Someone inside his own household had carried a confidential decision from the private audience room, a restricted space used for sensitive royal discussions, directly into the banquet. A second employee overheard the courtier reveal the most provocative condition. Meghan had wanted the palace to announce her return before she personally agreed to appear. The Duchess was not simply requesting inclusion, she was demanding control over the public narrative, forcing the institution to commit first, while preserving her freedom to accept, delay, or reject the invitation later. Camilla set down her fork when Meghan's name moved between two aides. She already knew part of the request, but the Queen Consort's discomfort deepened when she realized William had learned the full terms. Catherine watched her reaction, and the future king understood that information had reached Camilla before reaching him. William moved his chair several inches away from the table. Charles gave a small, unmistakable signal ordering the conversation to stop. The music continued, but everyone nearest them knew the dinner had changed. Before the evening ended, the prince would demand who had carried Meghan's request through the palace, and why Camilla had been trusted with it first. The whisper had exposed Meghan's request, but the deeper danger lay in the people who had carried it through the palace doors, and in the private loyalties now gathering around the king. The leaked whisper was not dangerous simply because Meghan wanted to return. It was dangerous because every person who heard it understood that her return would reopen wounds the palace had never truly healed. Charles saw a son slipping further away. William saw a boundary under attack. Camilla saw a chance to control the crisis. And Catherine saw the return of a conflict that had already cost the family more than anyone admitted. Charles carried the burden of being both father and sovereign. A sovereign was the reigning monarch responsible for protecting the crown above private emotion. Harry's absence still haunted the king, yet accepting Meghan's conditions could make years of public confrontation appear rewarded. William viewed the request differently. The future king believed royal access had to rest upon service, trust, and accountability. To him, this was not an invitation back into family life. It was an attempt to regain institutional standing without repairing the damage left behind. Charles slipped into a side chamber during dinner and pressed both hands against a desk. He admitted to his private secretary, the senior official handling his confidential affairs, that refusing Meghan might cost him another opportunity to speak honestly with Harry. The king feared losing his son permanently, but he also knew that surrendering to pressure could weaken every boundary the palace still possessed. Catherine found William near a closed corridor door and recognized the anger beneath his silence. The prince told her that Meghan's request disturbed him less than the secrecy surrounding it. She urged him not to confront Charles while emotion controlled the evening. William answered that silence had allowed the crisis to grow. He could not protect the future crown by pretending hidden negotiations were harmless. Camilla had seen Meghan's written terms before William knew any request existed. The Queen Consort had advised Charles that a limited return might reduce public pressure, provided palace officials controlled every appearance. Yet the message contained a harder condition. Meghan would not support private reconciliation between Harry and his father unless she was formally included and protected from what she called selective palace briefings, meaning information quietly given to chosen journalists to influence public opinion. Sophie noticed Charles emerge looking drained and asked whether the dinner should end early. The trusted confidant watched him refuse, insisting that guests must never feel the family's fracture. She understood that he was protecting appearances even as the private damage deepened. William confronted Camilla at the corridor's end and asked whether she had supported the proposal. She paused, then said she had supported keeping the door from closing forever. His silence made the betrayal unmistakable. To understand why Meghan demanded so much before setting foot inside the palace, the family would have to revisit the private ceremony where trust finally collapsed. Months before the dinner, Meghan had briefly believed that a path back into the royal circle remained possible. No cameras recorded the turning point. No public statement acknowledged it. Yet during one tightly guarded memorial ceremony, a change to a seating plan sent a message she never forgot. What appeared to the palace as a minor act of protocol became, in Meghan's mind, proof that she could never return without demanding guarantees first. Charles had invited Harry and Meghan to attend a private memorial service honoring Queen Elizabeth II's charitable legacy. The ceremony was intended to remain personal, restrained, and free from public performance. A memorial service was a gathering held to honor someone who had died and preserve the meaning of their life and work. Meghan saw the invitation as a test. Harry saw it as a fragile opportunity to stand beside his father and begin repairing a relationship damaged by distance, anger, and years of public accusation. Meghan arrived expecting to sit beside Harry in the front family row. Minutes before the service began, a palace official informed her that the chair had been removed. She would now sit behind two senior working royals because she no longer represented the crown. Precedence was the formal system deciding where royals stood or sat according to rank and official duty. Yet the explanation offered no comfort. To her, the change felt less like protocol and more like punishment delivered when leaving would cause maximum embarrassment. Meghan asked who had authorized the decision. The official refused to name anyone and repeated the language of rank. She looked toward Harry, but Charles had drawn him into a private conversation, and he did not immediately understand why his wife remained standing beside an empty space. Catherine noticed the displaced chair and approached with concern. The princess offered to ask that the arrangement be reconsidered, but Meghan refused. She would not remain in a room where her place could be changed without explanation, and then restored only through another woman's intervention. A staff member later disclosed through a private documented account that Charles had approved the original plan. The chair was moved only after Camilla's office questioned whether seating Meghan in front would imply that her official role had been restored. Harry confronted his father afterward. The king denied ordering the change but refused to reverse it publicly, fearing that doing so would undermine the household officers enforcing protocol. Meghan folded the second-row place card once and handed it back. In the car, she told Harry she would never again enter a royal room without knowing how the palace intended to define her. The dinner whisper was no longer merely about access or seating. It had become a judgment on who caused the original humiliation, and William was ready to demand an answer face to face. When the final guests began leaving Buckingham Palace, William did not return to his private rooms. He walked directly toward the Queen Consort's sitting room and asked that the doors be closed behind them. There were no photographers, no advisors, and no carefully rehearsed statements. Only two people standing across from one another, each convinced that the other had endangered the monarchy by choosing secrecy over trust. William believed Camilla's early involvement had given Meghan's request legitimacy before the direct heir was consulted. The direct heir was the person next in line to inherit the throne, and decisions affecting the future reign could not be negotiated around him without consequence. To the prince, this was part of a wider pattern. Boundaries were being shaped in private, then presented to him after emotional promises had already made resistance appear cruel. Camilla defended her role with equal force. Charles had approached her as a distressed husband and father, not simply as the sovereign seeking formal advice. She had tried to preserve contact with Harry without surrendering control of the palace. The queen consort insisted that keeping one narrow door open was not the same as restoring Meghan's former position. William asked whether her office had caused Meghan's chair to be moved at the memorial. Camilla admitted that her staff had raised the concern, but said the Lord Chamberlain's team made the final decision. The Lord Chamberlain's office was the department responsible for royal ceremonies, protocol, and official arrangements. William answered that questioning the seat minutes before the service had made the result inevitable. Her office had not moved the chair by hand, but it had created the pressure. Camilla accused him of treating every attempt at reconciliation as a threat to his authority. William replied that reconciliation without accountability became permission for old wounds to reopen. Forgiveness could not mean restoring access before trust had been rebuilt. Camilla then disclosed how far the negotiations had progressed. Charles had considered offering Meghan a private suite at Buckingham Palace during future visits if she signed a strict confidentiality agreement. William had never been told that accommodation was already being discussed. The prince placed a copy of Meghan's conditions between them and revealed that staff had heard she wanted the return announced before giving final acceptance. That arrangement could leave Charles exposed if she withdrew afterward and blamed the palace. Camilla pushed the document back without reading. She already knew every line. William stared at her and said, "Then you knew more than the heir." Her anger briefly gave way to hurt. Camilla said she had spent years being treated as an intruder and would not help create another permanent exile. By the time William left the room, the argument had moved beyond Meghan's return. It had become a struggle over who possessed the authority to speak for the crown. Royal power rarely announces itself with raised voices. It moves through diaries, access lists, private secretaries, and carefully worded approvals. Behind Meghan's request stood a small group of officials capable of turning a family conversation into an institutional arrangement. Yet when Charles examined the documents placed before him, he discovered that the process had advanced far beyond the informal discussion he believed he had authorized. Charles opened the briefing inside the sovereign's private office, the department that controls the monarch's schedule, private audiences, residential access, official correspondence, and major family appearances involving the crown. The king had believed his staff were exploring whether a private conversation with Harry might be possible. Instead, Meghan's representatives had been communicating through a trusted intermediary, keeping the negotiations hidden from William's household and several senior courtiers who would normally have reviewed such a sensitive return. Charles stopped at the phrase, "controlled reintegration." He circled it with his pen and asked why reconciliation between a father and son had been written as though it were a government operation. The language mattered because it transformed human pain into palace strategy. Harry was no longer being discussed as a wounded son. Meghan was no longer being treated as a family member. Both had become risks to be managed. Sir Michael Harrow admitted that he had feared involving William too early would produce immediate rejection. As the fictional senior private secretary overseeing the exchange, he had chosen secrecy because he believed progress required avoiding the heir's resistance. Charles's anger sharpened. The private office had not merely protected a delicate conversation, it had deliberately withheld information from the future king. The next page exposed something worse. A draft announcement already welcomed Harry and Meghan to a future palace gathering, even though Charles had approved no return. Officials had prepared the public outcome first, quietly positioning the monarch toward a decision he had not yet made. Charles then noticed a handwritten note stating that Camilla's office was supportive in principle. The queen consort's private compassion had been recorded as institutional approval, and used to move the process forward. The king removed his glasses and placed them beside the file. His silence lasted long enough for Sir Michael to understand that his position was now in danger. Charles felt manipulated by the officials appointed to protect him. William entered after being summoned. His father pushed the draft announcement across the desk and asked whether any version of the proposal could survive. The prince read the opening sentence, closed the folder, and answered that the palace had to stop negotiating with itself. Charles froze the entire process immediately, but the reversal came too late. Two conflicting messages were already traveling toward Harry and Meghan in California. The palace door had been placed under the king's control again, but the sudden reversal was already moving toward California, and the reaction would expose just how divided the royal household remained. Meghan did not learn that negotiations had collapsed through a formal palace letter. She learned through two messages that arrived less than 20 minutes apart. The first suggested that her conditions were still being considered. The second declared the entire process suspended by order of the king. For Meghan, the contradiction confirmed her oldest fear. Buckingham Palace was not speaking with one voice, and someone inside had allowed her to believe a return was closer than it truly was. Meghan read the first message from the trusted intermediary and believed progress remained possible. Accommodation, security, and seating arrangements were still under active review. An intermediary was a person used to carry confidential messages between sides without direct contact. To her, that wording meant the palace was preparing to accept most of her conditions. Minutes later, Harry received a direct communication from Charles's private office stating that every discussion had been frozen because the process lacked proper family consultation and had exceeded its original authority. Meghan placed both messages on the kitchen table and asked Harry which version represented his father's true position. He could not answer. The uncertainty returned them to the memorial ceremony, when one approved seat had vanished without explanation. She felt the same pattern repeating: invitation, hope, contradiction, humiliation. Harry called Charles immediately. The prince accused the palace of drawing them toward reconciliation, only to reject them once they approached. The king answered that he had been searching for a private path back to his son, but others had turned compassion into promises he had never authorized. His explanation carried regret, yet it could not undo the damage already done. Meghan then learned that William had seen her full list of conditions during the dinner. She suspected the leak had been designed to portray her request as a power grab rather than protection against another public slight. Harry was told that one demand had caused particular alarm. She wanted approval over how future appearances were described. Editorial control meant the power to shape or approve official wording before publication. William believed that demand would place royal communications under private negotiation. Camilla sat alone after Charles told her the talks were frozen. She removed a bracelet and quietly admitted that her effort to keep Harry connected may have deepened the separation. William received confirmation that a staff member had leaked the dinner whisper outside the palace. He did not celebrate. The prince closed the message and said the breach had injured everyone, including Meghan. Charles finally rejected further negotiation through officials. One direct conversation had to happen without aides, documents, demands, or intermediaries. After years of statements spoken through other people, the family's fate would turn on a private conversation in which neither side could hide behind the machinery of the monarchy. The conversation that changed the crisis did not happen in a throne room or across a formal conference table. Charles called Harry privately and asked him to speak as a son rather than as a representative of competing households. No private secretaries remained on the line. No statements were drafted in advance. For the first time since Meghan's request entered the palace, the two men confronted what they had each been too wounded to say directly. Charles began with the boundary he had failed to explain earlier. The king had never rejected seeing Harry or Meghan in private. He had rejected a formal return built around public guarantees because the monarchy could not promise status before trust had been rebuilt. A formal return meant renewed public access, official recognition, and a defined place within royal events. To him, granting those privileges first would make reconciliation look like a transaction rather than a repaired relationship. Harry answered that Meghan's conditions had grown from the memorial humiliation. Private assurances had promised dignity, yet protocol had changed her seat at the final moment. The prince explained that written commitments felt necessary because spoken promises repeatedly disappeared once palace officials took control. Meghan had not wanted another invitation that could be quietly reshaped after she arrived. Charles did not defend himself. He admitted that he had failed Meghan during the ceremony by allowing the last-minute decision to remain after recognizing the pain it caused. His silence had looked like approval, and the monarch accepted responsibility for that failure. Harry then made his own admission. Demanding a public announcement before accepting the invitation had placed his father in an impossible position. The condition was designed partly to prevent another reversal and partly to force the family to prove its sincerity. Charles then revealed what the first internal checks had uncovered. The leaked dinner whisper had not come from William's household. It came from a staff member connected to the intermediary who had managed Meghan's request. An intermediary was the trusted person carrying confidential messages between both sides. The discovery meant suspicion had been directed toward the wrong household, while the actual breach sat inside the negotiation itself. Harry offered one final clarification. Meghan had never demanded restoration as a working royal. She wanted formal recognition that she would attend as his wife and a family member, not as an unwanted guest whose place could be moved without warning. Charles proposed a narrower path: no royal reinstatement, no public announcement, and no negotiated palace role. Harry and Meghan would instead receive a private family invitation with agreed seating, security, and treatment. After a long silence, Harry promised to present the offer to Meghan without advisors. Charles said he would do the same with William. Neither man claimed victory. Both chose direct trust. Father and son had finally found a narrow path toward peace, yet outside the palace walls, one whispered sentence was about to become the loudest royal controversy of the night. By morning, the private whisper had escaped every palace wall built to contain it. Broadcasters interrupted their schedules. Newspapers rushed out new front pages. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, beneath a sky of camera lights and raised phones. Yet the public was not reacting to a simple question of whether Meghan should return. Britain was watching an argument over dignity, loyalty, forgiveness, and who had the power to define belonging inside the royal family. Buckingham Palace confirmed that a confidential family discussion had been mishandled, but refused to publish Meghan's private conditions. Officials stressed that no formal restoration of royal duties had ever been approved. Royal duties were the official public responsibilities carried out on behalf of the monarch, including ceremonies, charity work, and state engagements. The distinction mattered because the debate was no longer only about family access. It concerned whether private reconciliation could be mistaken for a return to institutional power. Public opinion divided almost instantly. Some believed Meghan had attempted to regain influence without accepting the obligations that came with royal service. Others argued that written guarantees were understandable after the memorial seating incident had shown how quickly private assurances could disappear. The fictional Daily Chronicle captured the controversy with an empty gilded chair beneath the headline, "The Seat That Shook the Palace." That image transformed one altered place into a symbol of every unresolved wound. Eleanor Shaw intensified the debate during an evening broadcast outside Buckingham Palace. The presenter said, "This was never only about whether Meghan returned, it was about whether the palace could promise she would not be humiliated again." Her words gave the crisis emotional clarity. Status had started the argument, but fear of public rejection had sustained it. William watched beside Catherine as commentators suggested he had personally blocked Meghan. The prince became frustrated that a leak had turned institutional concern into an accusation against him. Catherine reminded him that defending the monarchy also required admitting where it had acted without compassion. He could protect boundaries without pretending the memorial humiliation had caused no harm. Meghan saw the empty chair front page and believed the palace had converted her pain into spectacle. Harry then explained Charles's private offer, a family invitation without public restoration, but with agreed security, seating, and treatment. The Duchess now faced the hardest choice: She could demand visible validation, or accept a quieter relationship built without title or announcement. The palace removed the employee responsible for transmitting confidential details from duty, pending an internal review. The intermediary channel was permanently closed. At the gates, a woman left a handwritten card reading, "Family first, titles second." The world had delivered its judgment on the whisper, but the final verdict belonged to Meghan herself. Return as a symbol of royal restoration, or accept a quieter place built on family rather than status. Meghan's final answer did not arrive through lawyers, representatives, or carefully placed whispers. She sent it directly to Charles. She would not return as a working royal, demand a restored palace role, or ask for a public announcement declaring victory, but she would accept a private family invitation beside Harry, provided the palace honored one simple promise: no last-minute humiliation, no hidden rearrangement, and no uncertainty about whether she belonged in the room. Meghan rejected the draft plan for formal reintegration. Formal reintegration meant returning to recognized royal duties, public authority, and an official position within the institution. She accepted that her future could no longer be built around the role she once held. Charles agreed, because her remaining conditions concerned basic dignity rather than status. Security, seating, and access would be settled in advance and confirmed directly between both households, leaving no space for another unexplained change. Meghan told Harry that Buckingham Palace no longer needed to announce her value. She needed proof that entering a family room would not require surrendering her dignity. The prince carried that message to his father and accepted the difference between family reconciliation and royal restoration. Charles admitted that the distinction should have been made clear years earlier, before affection and duty became weapons used by both sides. William agreed to the private invitation after receiving direct assurance that no constitutional role, official platform, or institutional authority would be restored. A constitutional role was a formal responsibility connected to the crown and its legal structure. The future king also accepted that the memorial seating change had been needlessly cruel. He promised it would not happen again, not because every wound had healed, but because boundaries did not require humiliation. Camilla faced her own responsibility. The queen consort acknowledged that unofficial involvement had blurred compassion with authority. She apologized to Charles for allowing personal support to be recorded as palace approval. The intermediary system was abolished. The employee responsible for the leak left royal service, and future communication involving Harry and Meghan would be direct, documented, and approved by both the king's and heir's offices. Charles read Meghan's message alone, folded it carefully, and placed it inside a private drawer rather than an official red box. A red box was the locked case used for state papers requiring the monarch's attention. His choice made the meaning clear. This was not an act of state, it was a family decision. The whisper restored no title and delivered no victory. Meghan surrendered public restoration. Charles abandoned emotional negotiation through officials. William protected the crown while accepting the cruelty of unnecessary exclusion. Harry secured dignity for his wife without demanding power. The whisper that threatened to divide the palace ultimately forced its doors open, not to restored power or forgotten titles, but to a final understanding that dignity could survive even when royal life could not. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.